Are you able to see my screen? Can I see thumbs up if you can see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Okay. 1 second. Let me try to split so that I can see you all at the same time. Awesome. Cool. So firstly, before I dive into this, feel free to stop me at any time. I want to keep this an interactive session. Feel free to stop me, ask questions, and I try to make this as conversational as possible. And also find the first time I heard about the role of a product manager and what PMs do was when I was attending a talk at IIIT-Delhi in 2014 when there was a PM from Google who talked about how what they do, and I got super excited about it. And that's kind of how I went down this path of researching and trying to become a PM eventually. So I'm super excited to be doing the same. Hopefully can inspire some of you to become PMs. So what do product managers really do? We've got a packed agenda today. We're going to talk about, I'm going to start with a quick introduction, talk about who is a product manager, some PM skills, talk about the day in the life of a PM. I actually decided to remove section 5, but I forgot to remove it from the agenda. However, we can still talk about it in the Q&A if we have time. Cool. Hi, I'm Rohan. I'm a product manager at Facebook. I work on driving business messaging growth on Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Previously, I was at Yelp, where I grew Request to Code by 25%. Request to Code is a home and local services messaging platform similar to Urban Company in India. And prior to that, I built an experimentation program at Yelp that 10x the volume of experiments. Our work is now the subject of a Harvard Business School case. When I was at IIIT-Delhi, I also co-founded and spearheaded a nonprofit organization called Find a Way, focused on equitable access to education. I'm a proud Georgia Tech and IIIT-D alum. And as Harsh mentioned, I graduated IIIT in 16 and went to Georgia Tech right after and graduated from Georgia Tech in 18. So who is a product manager? I love to get a sense of what does the audience think? Anyone? Has anyone heard about product managers?
So, very simple definition, if I can maybe write. So, someone who is responsible for managing design, business, and UI UX interaction, and making a good, valuable product.
Okay, that makes sense. I see a couple of comments.
I think somebody has a sense of how the product plays out in the market, and they get to decide the direction with respect to real users who will be using it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I see a couple of Kshitij says it's about product strategy. Tanya mentioned someone who owns a product across his life cycle. Ribav talked about CEO of a product. I have strong opinions about that on the next slide that I'll talk about. Yashwin mentioned who integrates the various domains for a product. And Ribav again commented saying managing a cross-functional team. Anything else? Any other ideas? Any other thoughts around PMing? One who actually gets the work done. Well, my engineers would find that pretty controversial. Cool. So I guess Ribav mentioned CEO of the product. Well, this is I personally strongly believe this is one of the biggest myths about this role, that PMs are the CEOs of the product. CEOs have a lot of other responsibilities: hiring, finance, P&L, a lot of different roles and different responsibilities outside the one that a product manager has. And this is somehow very commonly referred to description of the role, which I think is pretty incorrect. Manager. So where does the manager part come in the product manager? Do PMs manage people? Do PMs manage engineers, data scientists? No, they manage none of them. PMs have all the accountability without any of the authority. All your influence is by trying to make a case, trying to get buy-in from people, trying to influence people, not because you have the authority to do so, but because you can get people excited for that. PMs are not managers. I think one of the most fit definitions that I've seen is this one by Shreyas Doshi. PMs define the product and coordinate actions across the organization to enable its success. I think many of you talked about like coordinating actions, managing cross-functional teams. I think that's a very, very key part of what a PM does. So defining the product is about setting the constraints where the different parts of the organization can function and figure out how to like move ahead. Then you can decide on a coordinated set of actions which the entire organization needs to take. And when we talk about coordinated set of actions for the entire organization, we're talking about not just design, engineering, we're talking about marketing, legal, privacy across the board to enable the product is actually a success. And how do you move it forward means different things in different contexts, which we'll talk about later on as well. So given all this, what are the skills that PMs need? What is the number one job of a PM? Any thoughts?
Make a decision. So take a decision.
Okay. Taking a decision.
Decide the product roadmap.
Okay.
Understand a user problem to be solved.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I see more comments coming in. Bridging the gap between various teams, combining business and tech. What else? Any other thoughts, opinions?
Maybe oversee a product from start to finish.
Okay. Tanya talks about essentially solving a user's problem. Kshitij talks about setting a vision of the product, seeking the customer's requirements and building a solution upon it. Makes sense. Well, keeping teams motivated, that's definitely a big part of it. If I had to define the PM's job in is the primary job of a PM, I would say it's to drive outcomes. Driving outcomes is the act of consistently delivering impact for the users and the business. Impact comes in many forms: driving bottom line revenue, uncovering new user insights, reducing costs of infrastructure, reducing costs of training ML models. You drive impact and it comes in multiple different forms. It's not necessarily just driving revenue, which I think when I talk to people who are trying to transition into PMing, I talk to them about like driving outcomes, and most people always think of driving revenue. And how can PMs create impact? I think driving outcomes is the function of four things: product strategy, product execution, being insights driven, and having team leadership. I think in between the comments and everything, you all have mentioned all of these things. And I'm sure different people you talk to would put a different amount of emphasis on these different skills. And it also sort of differs based on the company which company you're at, what's the culture of the company, and what stage the company is in as well. Like at bigger companies, you might need more of team leadership, more stakeholder management, while at smaller companies, you might be just focused more on being product execution, just like moving forward. So what does product strategy exactly mean? Product strategy is the ability to paint a clear picture of what success looks like and identifying a series of coordinated actions to achieve this defined success. As you move from being like an associate PM to a senior PM, essentially increasing with increasing seniority, increasing experience, and in different companies, these are known by like different words, like senior, sometimes it's principal, they have like different titles. Facebook is, for example, a super flat organization and everyone's a PM. But there are different levels based on where in the career you are. So from a product strategy perspective, you might expect an associate PM to set the strategy for a small part of the product with guidance from a senior PM or a manager. But once you move ahead, once you keep on becoming more and more senior, you start setting the strategy for an ambiguous problem space across multiple teams. There's a huge difference though. You're moving from a small part of the product to a bigger ambiguous problem space across multiple teams. Product execution. It's the ability to deliver products by articulating the problem statement, gathering key requirements for a solution. This also includes building a regular shipping cadence to test key assumptions faster. This is being able to test key assumptions faster is a very important part of product execution. An associate PM is,
What's a
yes,
shipping cadence?
yeah, shipping cadence. Shipping cadence is the velocity. How often is your team shipping? And this is obviously there's like different inputs that go into it. One is like how are your like how fast are your engineers developing things? Are you being able to ship like let's say bi-weekly or at the end of every sprint? But outside of how fast your engineers are building products or your designers like designing products, there's also like a plan of action you put into place where let's say someone comes up with the product saying when for example Facebook Marketplace was being built, it wasn't just suddenly a multi-billion-dollar product. Someone had to break it down into smaller milestones to say these are the achievable milestones that we can actually execute every like 2 weeks to make sure we're headed in the right direction. So essentially, as opposed to saying that this is my vision and this is something we'll do in the next 2 years and you'll see a product at the end of 2 years, breaking it down into smaller milestones that people can actually execute and build something meaningful every like couple of weeks so that we can learn, iterate, and move in the right direction.
So
Does that
does
answer your question?
agile
Yeah.
methodology work like that? That you ship deliverables after every sprint, like over a span of like 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, it does. However, I think the from a PM's perspective, the thing to figure out is what do you ship in the next 2 weeks? If I ask you to break down, for example, Facebook dating, like how would you break it down? What should people be working on that should ship in the next 2 weeks? Like you need to figure out the most important elements of this product and also figure out the sequencing of it. Would you build the would you build like for example an ability for people to upload their own pictures first, or would you build the ability for people to like each other first, or would you build some people to upload their videos first? What matters, what's easier to build, what is strategically more important, being able to sequence it and break it down. But it is similar to like the agile methodology that you talk about where teams end up shipping something bi-weekly. Does that answer your question, Tanya?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I had a question regarding the
Yeah.
like you mentioned the problem statements and success metrics and all that. So just a question. So over here, like in our college journey and the work that we do, like I'm just speaking from a designer's point of view, we create problem statements, then we think of these things. So how are the problems statements that either a designer creates different from what a PM does? Because
Yeah.
like the place that I'm also working right now, it's very ambiguous and I'm not clear what is the role of the PM and what I do.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, firstly, there's some fundamental dynamics between designers and PMs that are probably applicable at most places, but then it also varies from one company to the other. Depends on, so I can give you an example of like Yelp and Facebook. For example, firstly, some fundamental dynamics between how designers and PMs work. I partner with my design team like super closely. I work with so I have a designer like my designer and I have one designer on my team. He and I partner super closely. We are involved thinking about like user problems from early on. I bring them in. We both act as sounding boards for each other, and also talk through like user problems and like user experience problems from early on. My problem statement refinement here is by working super closely with the designer. It is not the PM or the designer doing it. Now, this is, I think, also more of a Facebook growth culture where where PMs almost develop like frameworks and give up ownership of certain parts of the problem to different cross-functional partners, like design, product growth, data science, etc., depending upon what makes sense. Whereas in Yelp, it was a very different different culture. Yelp was more about, for example, the PM would set the sandbox, would almost like figure out the problem is like, for example, people are not a lot of people are dropping, businesses are dropping while onboarding to while onboarding or setting up their profiles and like request a code. And then you would almost like take it to like a problem statement when by the time you hand it to a designer, and designer would build off this problem statement and then come up with like different solutions and possible tests. Whereas at Facebook, it's about like building frameworks and giving ownership to different cross-functional partners. So the difference, the design and PM work very closely, should be partnering very, very closely from early on in the product development process. However, the exact area of ownership, exact difference really depends on what company you're working at, and also like what stage the product is in. And when I say what stage the product or company is in, I mean, for example, being at a startup versus being at like a big tech. Startup, you're probably working on one product. You probably, there are a limited number of problems that you want to go deep on. But at like big tech, Google, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, all these things, there's just the product portfolio and footprint is just so big for all PMs that you want to build scalable processes to hand over ownership to different cross-functional partners. Does that answer your question, Arnesh?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Maybe I would be curious to know what these frameworks and processes are to ensure, all the PMs and everything stays together. But you can come to that if you have time later on. I think you should continue with your presentation now. Thank you.
Sounds good. I think there's one more question in the comments. Rupal just asked, how is TPM different from PM? So for those in the audience who don't know what a TPM is, TPMs are technical program managers, and PMs, as we're talking about, are product managers. TPMs are, firstly, program managers. A program, the technical definition of a program is a collection of projects. You probably heard of a project manager. A program manager is someone who manages multiple projects, like a program. Like, for example, the home and local services program at Yelp consists of request to code, the search team, and the home screen team and stuff like that. A TPM doesn't necessarily, at least in my experience, doesn't contribute to the strategy of the product. They make sure that the coordination across different teams goes on smoothly and everything works like a well-oiled machinery. The right stakeholders are talking to each other. There are all trackers. Everything is maintained. So TPMs are mostly contributing towards the execution of things, not contributing to the strategy or other aspects of this. PMs, however, are more focused on like the strategy and execution and like other elements of the product as well. Cool. Coming back to this. Oops. Yeah. So for product execution, for an associate PM, you might see them frame simple problem statement and define measure of success with some guidance. They need help to scope what is essential versus nice to have. This is what I was talking about when I was commenting on when Tanya and I were talking about shipping cadence. Like associate PMs usually need help to figure out what is essential versus what is nice to have. Whereas a senior PM would be able to independently articulate problem statements in ambiguous and big complex areas, and they guide the team to the fastest learning path. They can quickly identify what is essential versus what is nice to have, and what is something we need to build now. Team leadership. It's the ability to communicate and collaborate effectively to inspire team and stakeholders. This includes owning a problem space and building a narrative for it. An associate PM can communicate and collaborate effectively with the team. They regularly bring back information such as company data or market insights that might be useful for the team. Whereas a senior PM not only communicates and collaborates with the team, but also communicates with stakeholders, leaderships across the team. They build narratives to inspire action. They're representatives of the team and the product across the board. They're seen as the expert in the problem space. And finally, being insights-driven. Being insights-driven is the ability to leverage customer, competitive, and data insights to guide decision-making. An associate PM regularly talks to customers and leverages learnings to create value. They need help from analytics partners to build a narrative with data insights. Whereas a senior PM regularly talks to customers about their use case and beyond to be able to create more scope for the team, and also seen as the go-to person to learn about the users of the product. They educate the understand roadmap to uncover insights. when I say understand roadmap, I mean functions such as data science, user research, and design. These PMs, not like associate PMs, usually work with these functions and make sure they can get things done, whereas senior PMs will be educating the data research and design functions to figure out what needs to be solved. They'll help them prioritize and come up with the most relevant questions to get answered. Angel has a question. What do you mean by analytics partners? Primarily, when I say analytics partners, I mean data scientists. But in different companies, there are different roles as well. For example, Facebook has product experience analysts and product growth analysts. Product growth analysts are people with like good data skills and also the ability to think through growth problems. Product experience analysts are people who have, again, good data skills, can write SQL queries, can like understand different data models, can understand basic stats, but also understand the user experience side of things. So when I say analytics partners, I mean anyone who can help with who has basic understanding of statistics and can help with writing queries, counting, doing analyses. Cool. Leveling up as an ICPM. When IC is an individual contributor, these are PMs who are not managers. These are PMs who are like ICs. When I say PM managers, managers of PMs who like manage other ICPMs. I'm an ICPM, and this conversation is also focused. The seniority grade and the skills that I'm talking about are also focused on like ICPMs. When people are managing other PMs, that's a different ballgame altogether. And I'm probably not in the best position to like talk about that as well. So when people go from being an associate to a senior, you might have seen certain common themes. PMs become more forward-looking. They can look beyond the next month or next 2 months, for example. They have a roadmap set for multiple years. Their scope increases. The scope increase usually happens by PMs having the ability to create more scope by identifying the right problems, talking to more users, and realizing and identifying problems that no one is solving yet. They become more and more autonomous. They work independently. They are able to come up with the right questions, the right problems, the right solutions. They don't need as much guidance. And also over time, they start over time when you get and also up level your team in different aspects. So people, as they grow more senior, become more forward looking, have increased scope, start working independently, and start mentoring others. Are there any questions before I move ahead? Ria's asking, how is this different from design research? So research and yeah. So this is going back. So research functions are slightly different. Yes, research functions are focused on understanding the problem and So research function essentially focused on like one of the two things, either doing generative or evaluative research. Where towards generative is when you're trying to develop more like proactive research, like fundamental research that can help others figure out which direction to move in. And the second is evaluative, where you already know what the problem is and you're trying to understand the why. For example, like onboarding isn't working, let's go about figuring out why. Or people aren't using XYZ app, let's go figure out why. However, so this is where researchers excel. However, a PM contributes to helping them figure out the problem. There could be like 20 problems to solve. A researcher's job is, obviously, as you get more senior, even in the research field, you start contributing to like independently identifying problem statements. But at least early on, it's more of the PM's responsibility to figure out which ones are the key problems to solve. And then the researcher picks it up and comes to, like does the research plan and the research study, etc. So even though research and I think PMs are very strong partners, I rely very heavily on my research partners and research function. But they're slightly different. They're actually very different in the sense that research, I said at the end of the day, it's researchers' job to influence and educate the strategy, but it's the PM's job to set the strategy. it's not the research function's job to make sure execution is going well across the board. And also team leadership for research sort of means a different thing, where they're trying to like make sure the research that they've done reaches out to the right audience, as opposed to a PM making sure the communication collaboration is happening effectively, being representatives for the team, and also fighting for more resources for the team. However, the fundamental product building aspect is sort of similar, because the design process is the same. Designers are still going from problem to solution, making it going, iterating on it, same researchers doing the same, but everyone's job in this entire life cycle is different. PMs are probably the only function that are involved in the entire life cycle of the product. Does it answer your question, Ria? So, no. So PMs are not taking the final decision. So a PM's job is, I think this is also where there's like slight confusion. PMs don't take decisions. I'm not making any decision. I'm responsible for the outcome. There's a nuance there. I want to make sure that everyone gets a say. Every function, we make sure we've consulted the right partners. We've gotten the right input to help the team come to the right decision. I'm not making the decision for them. I don't own the decision. I own the outcome. My job is to make sure at the end of the day, for example, let's say as I work on business messaging growth, let's say my job is to grow number of conversations happening on like, WhatsApp, business to people conversations happening on WhatsApp. I'm responsible for making sure the end number goes up, but I'm not making the decisions that go as inputs. I'm facilitating the process of making decisions by making sure that we're getting the right input. Does that make sense? I mean, which is to say, there are definitely situations where you have to take a step back when the team can't come to a conclusion or the team can't come to a decision, where you have to put your foot down and be like, okay, this is what we are going ahead with in interest of execution velocity. This is what we'll execute on. But most of the times, and I can say this is about 90% of the times, I facilitate the decision-making process by making sure right inputs are heard. Because if I'm being honest, a designer can do design better than I can, a researcher can do research better than I can, an analytics function can do analytics better than I can. So my job is to make sure we get the right inputs and the right decision and figure out what to do next. Ribhav, so these decisions are taken by the team lead. What do you mean by the team lead?
So usually there are supervisors and team leads of a team. So like design leads, they are technical lead and analytics lead. So are these decisions taken by them?
Okay, great question. So when we say, so it depends again, and from a company to company. Like, let me give you an example of Apple versus Facebook. Apple is a very tops-down culture, and Facebook is a very bottoms-up culture. In Facebook, I obviously have multiple different levels of leads. But team leads, there's like my direct leads, then they're like their managers and managers of managers, and all these, they go all the way up to Zuck. So they're like different levels of reviews and different levels of like feedback. Now at Facebook, you're expected to come up with decisions, products, solutions, and even problem spaces bottoms up. So I go to my leads for input and feedback. No one in my entire leadership chain would ever ask me to work on a specific problem. They would give me feedback, they would give me guidance, and they would let me come to the decision, and they would essentially like give you the full autonomy to build whatever you want to build. Whereas Apple is a very tops-down culture. Apple is somewhere where you're almost presented a problem space that you come up with a solution with. And that's sort of very different, because it's like, essentially, as I mentioned, it's like someone set the sandbox for you. So that's a very top-down culture. And this kind of depends on like what your product portfolio is, what your product culture is. For example, I'm assuming you all really know how Apple's like known to be very secretive, and but that's how they believe that being that secretive is like a brand advantage to them, that adds value to how their product functions and how product lifecycle, how their product sells. So for them, it makes sense to be top down. Also, they want these things to be secret, whereas Facebook wants it to. With one of Facebook's values is to be able to move fast, and to be able to move fast, you need to have a bottoms up culture and give people the ability to make decisions. Cool. We have some more questions. Do you as PM interact with engineers? If yes, what exactly is the interaction? Asking this because you mentioned it's the responsibility of TPM. So do I interact with engineers? Yes, every single day. I meet with my engineers almost every single day. Uh, so when I said, so just to clarify, I didn't say TPM, it's the responsibility of the TPMs to interact with engineers. TPM's responsibility is to do project management for like complex systems where complex products which have input from multiple different teams. They are not necessarily talking to engineers. They could be talking to designers. They could be talking to other TPMs. They could be talking to other PMs. Whereas my interactions with my engineers are, for example, as we talked about, maybe some engineers need help in figuring out how to move ahead with a particular problem space, figuring out what should be the next thing we build in this like really big. So we have like a 2-year vision. What is the next thing we should build? Someone needs help in figuring out that. Other times my engineers have like awesome ideas of things like we should implement. And if they want me to figure out how we can get it sized or get resourcing for it, sometimes these conversations about that. I heavily rely on my engineering manager counterpart and my tech leads to help me do engineering sizing for the roadmap. Engineers have a big influence on how the strategy functions. Like they are literally the people who are building the product. So yeah, it's not just well. I also talk to my engineers a lot about like product strategy. There are a lot of senior engineers on my team who've been working at Facebook and also like on the same problem space for years, and often have like great ideas and like great context on what's the next problem we should solve. Rhythm says, so yes, Kunal, great question. Individual contributors are people who are not managers. Individual contributors don't manage people. Like there are individual contributor designers, there are individual contributors engineers, there are individual contributors PMs. You stop being an individual contributor or an IC when you become a manager. When you start managing people, your contribution is by influencing and up-leveling other people. Like, and design manager is not an individual contributor. An engineering manager is not an individual contributor. A manager of PM, sorry, a manager of PMs is not an IC. So Rhythm says, so basically you're responsible for the execution of the project. Can you throw more color on that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, previously you mentioned that you don't manage the teams, like they're not you don't manage the people, but you manage the projects. I was just clarifying that.
Yeah. Yes, PMs are definitely responsible for the execution of a product, and well, it's more. Um, it depends on like where in your career you are. When you're starting out, an associate PM is responsible for the execution of a project. Yes. You move slightly senior, you become slightly more senior. Now you're responsible for the execution of a let's say a full product, which includes multiple projects. And then you grow more senior. Now you're responsible for the execution of an entire problem space, which includes multiple different teams, and these multiple different teams work on multiple different like products and problem spaces. Like all the way up, like the higher you keep on going, your product portfolio and footprint keeps on increasing. So execution is definitely one of the things. But prior to that, I think the two like setting the product strategy so that you can figure out what to execute on is like it's one of the bigger elements of this process. And also execution is not just going to people and being like, oh, are you done? Have you moved ahead? Have you moved ahead? Have you done this? Execution is about making sure you remove all the blockers for your team. Execution is about making sure you set up scalable frameworks that that allows your team to make independent decisions. When I say frameworks, for example, setting up like product principles, setting up guidelines for how, when you're trying to make decisions, how should you make decisions in the next 6 months? What do we need to achieve in the next like 1 year, for example, so that team becomes more autonomous. So yes, execution is a big part, but prior to that, you need to set strategy and also focus on other elements of how things are going around.
Cool, man. Totally makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Tanya has a question. Do you think additional skills are required to be a good APM after graduating with a BTech from IIIT-Delhi? Well, are different skills needed? I think a lot of that's a good question. Yes, I think yes, they're definitely like different skills that, especially as a PM, I think a large part of being a PM are skills that I think you pick up when you're trying to build something. It's not necessarily something you pick up in school programs. Like IIIT gave me, I think two things actually, where IIIT gave me an edge and gave me a good foundation was one, IIIT gave me a good technical understanding, gave me a good foundational understanding of how different computational systems work. But I was only able to learn how to build production grade systems when I worked on production grade systems. Now, internships are a very, very good way to do this. Like in internships, you get full depending upon where you're interning, you get full responsibility, you get to work on production grade systems, and it's like a walled garden where people are sort of guiding you, coaching you, and you still get to apply the skills that you've learned in the classroom to like production grade systems. And the second thing I thought that IIIT did very well was introducing me to design thinking through a bunch of different summer programs and HCI classes and like a bunch of different um, experiences of building projects. I think design thinking and design thinking and also like research, the research element sort of plays into the same thing because you go from a broad problem and you iterate and you come narrow down to the right problem statement. Working on both those things also helped me hone my ability to come up with problem statements and identify the next best step. So in that sense, that IIIT gives you two things. It gave me good technical foundation and the ability to and introduce me to the design process. However, I do think a large part of being a PM is you learn a large part of being a PM and up leveling as a PM once you I guess own a product. But APM programs are at least the ones that I know of are designed for people who are designed in a way where they want to coach people who are new grads and who are new to this product management culture and introduce them to owning a product. What does it mean to build a strategy? What does it mean to execute on a product? So I don't necessarily. I think the expectations of an APM program are such that IIIT is prepping you perfectly.
I had a slightly follow up to this. Basically, yeah. I was asking from a slightly different perspective because I don't know if you've heard, but IIIT has these new programs in place. One of them, the one I'm from, is called CSSS, which is Computer Science and Social Sciences. It's kind of like a double major. It's an interdisciplinary course. And what it does is, what you mentioned, the design thinking as well as the technical background, it kind of specializes those skills specifically. So for example, I've chosen to specialize in human computer interaction. So I've done courses on user psychology, sociology, human centered computing, things like that, a lot of affective computing, all of these really designed for understanding user problems, kind of like it's that kind of a course. So from that point of view, does that make me more or less qualified to be an APM?
So I don't know if it makes you more or less qualified, but I think these things are super relevant. Well, when I was at IIIT, we didn't have like a similar split or like similar double major. We didn't have these programs. So I'm not exactly aware about what the exact context is, but like the focus on design thinking is very, very relevant to your day-to-day PMing. Like it's super, it's a good ability to hone early on. Not just also PMing, like the more senior you become even as an engineer, you are involved in the design process. You are involved in building the product strategy. You are, now product strategy also means different things. Like product strategy is not always just thinking about a revenue making product. Like there are PMs and there are senior engineers who define the strategy for example, Yelp's machine learning platform. You need to strategize there as well, like what should you be building? So even though that's a very hard technical problem, but it's still like design thinking is applied to it on a day-to-day basis. So I do think that those things are very relevant. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That really helps.
What did I study in Georgia Tech? Priya, I studied a major in HCI, interactive computing, design thinking, and HCI. I got introduced to it at IIIT-Delhi. I took PK's class in HCI, and that got me super excited about it. And I thought that was super fun. And yeah, went on to major in that in grad school. Cool. Ayushi is asking, it would be great if you could give some insights on what higher degree is appropriate to get in PM, MS in HCI, Infosys, or MBA. So I don't think there's so that well that's a I see you see PMs come from like all backgrounds. So there's no requirement for having a certain degree, especially for PMs. PMs come from like different walks of life. They've had different flavors of experience. So you don't need a degree or a higher degree per se. Like a lot of the PMs I work with only have an undergrad degree. They never went to grad school because that's not something that's needed for the job. So is it a requirement? No. Having said that, I do, and this is obviously, I don't have like numbers on this. This is like purely like, just based on like hearsay and observation. I think because of like top MBA schools having these like relationships build with companies and have a PM hiring pipeline in place, it becomes slightly, I think you get, I don't know if it's easier to become a PM, but it's definitely easier to get, well, not definitely, based on hearsay, it's easier to get an interview or get into the PM interviewing pipeline, as opposed to if you might be an, like an MS in HCI or MS in CS, for example. But it's equally hard for MBAs or like people with an MS and HCI background to get a PM job if they don't have PM experience. Like PM roles are definitely, APM programs are slightly different, but outside that, most PM roles are heavily biased towards people who've had experience either as a PM or who worked as an engineer or like, similar tech role, but in the same problem space. But having said that, don't like decide your grad school degree based on what will make it easier for you to become a PM. You should still continue to do what you think is best for your career and what you're super excited about. And you'll be able to navigate and find your way. Cool. Rhythm, did you have a question? You unmuted. Oh, someone. Was it Rupal?
Yeah, I had unmuted, but since you switched the slides, yeah.
No, go for it.
Okay, cool. So I was just asking, I mean, so if you're a software engineer, let's say, so how easy is to switch your teams and, go into the PM field?
Yeah. Again, depends on like what company, what context are we talking about. I can talk about like Yelp and Facebook. At Yelp and Facebook, I think the process to get for internal transfer from like one function to the other, it's firstly you express interest to your manager. You have a conversation with them that this is something you want to explore. Most managers are super are like excited about I would be supportive of this and would be more than happy to like help you out here. They will either like be able to guide you on next steps or put you in touch with like other like PMs or PM managers or someone. You can either, I've seen a lot of people start contributing to like product strategy and like team processes and team health and all of those stuff in the team they're an engineer in, and eventually make a case to get an interview. And then they still have to go through like regular PM interviews at both Yelp and Facebook. But I think people start having a conversation earlier on, trying to contribute indirectly without actually having the PM role, so that they can make a case for it and then go through full PM loops. Now, I think I don't have exact numbers on like what percentage of people are successful in doing this, but I do think a large number, like it's a decent number of people, because I know a lot of my friends and colleagues at work who've done that. It's a good number of people. I'm not sure what the exact success rate is, but I don't think it's like that hard. And I think it's if I had like it puts you in a good position as well, because you understand the problem space, you understand the product as well to change and become a different play a different role.
Yeah, makes sense because I was just browsing through some positions and then some of them have like minimum experience. So I was just wondering, so how easy is to switch the teams?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, like what
Yeah,
context.
that's all.
But
It depends
again,
on company. Yeah.
yeah. So I think Rupal, you had a question.
Yeah, Rohan, I was like hoping if you can like talk a little from the lens of hiring, scenario in this domain, and especially from the like eyes of like let's say triple IT recent grads, because like maybe it's just my experience, but the way I see the hiring scenario in like India or in our campuses usually is we are only majorly hired for SWV roles. I see these PM roles very very hard to reach. Is it because is it because these roles are reachable only for students who have some good grad degrees, or is it reachable for like fresh grads like who just have like an undergrad degree? So can you touch upon that? Like what is it exactly PM roles these hiring managers are looking for?
Yeah, um, I can do that. So, firstly, I do think getting your first PM job is hard. It took me about 8.5 months of interviewing, and I was in school at that point, trying to like get access to people, trying to like talk to people, because I didn't have any PM experience at that point. It took me about 7 to 8 months, something like that, to convince someone to be able to give me a PM internship so that I can eventually find a PM job. So I think your best, I think my route was, I mean, there are multiple different routes. My route was to find a PM internship, and then transition to then, having had done at least one PM internship, try to make a case and try to get a PM job at some other company. Now, I would expect Triple IT to have a stronger like engineering hiring pipeline. That's natural. It's a engineering first school, and engineering programs are like super mature. PM roles are relatively newer. At least like, well, they're not like newer. They always existed in some form or the other. I think like formalized PM roles are relatively newer in India at least. Um, so I think it's definitely. I'm not sure if like on campus we get any PM companies to recruit, but in general, I think what would really help is trying like trying to reach out to people, being more proactive, trying to reach out to people in different companies who are in the PM hiring pipeline, or who can help you like find internships, or who can give you referrals in like different places, so that you can kickstart your PM flywheel. And once you kickstart that PM journey, it becomes easier to get future jobs. In the beginning, it's however definitely harder. And I think you also mentioned like, is it reserved for people with like great grad school degrees or something like that? I don't think that's the case at all. Like, if you hustle enough to find people who can refer you, and there are people willing to like get you in the pipeline, you can manage your way to find a PM job. Um, but yes, this is getting a PM job might be slightly easier for example, from like in IIM Ahmedabad or an IIM Bangalore, because they have that PM pipeline set up where companies looking for PMs also come to the campus. But like it's natural. Like, having said that, like for example, if you wanted to become an engineer again after being an IIM Ahmedabad, then the hustle's on you, right? Like that, and that makes sense. Um, so if I had to like try to become a PM directly from after IIIT-Delhi, I would probably start to find an internship first, try to reach out to people. Also often a thoughtful cold call on like LinkedIn or different sources also helps. Keep in mind, these people are like super busy, they have like full-time jobs, but if you're thoughtful, I've often gotten responses from people. Um, so yeah, hustle, reach out to people, try to find referrals, try to dig into the alumni network, to get a referral and get in the interview process. It is absolutely not reserved for people with great grad school degrees.
Yeah, well, this really helps. And why I asked this question is because since quite some time I've been wondering why only undergrads from the US. I see people from there. Students who are in, they're sophomores or juniors or seniors. They're getting into PM industry, be it internships or direct jobs. But here I don't see it at all. Or maybe I didn't search enough, but I really don't see it here at all. So I was wondering what is it that's lacking? Is it students not trying, or maybe the companies don't want to hire? So yeah.
I'm not specifically sure about the Indian scenario on how the PM role and the scene functions, but I think the PM role in general is a little more matured in the US, and formally more mature. I think people have been doing the PM role in one form or the other. Sometimes if you don't have a PM, the founders are doing it or the engineers are doing it. But it's more formalized, and there are more at least from the look of it, from the surface, it looks like there are more entry-level programs in the US for PMs, APM programs at Uber, Facebook, Google, Asana, there are Yelp, there are 1,000 different of these. Yeah. So I think keep on trying, keep on hustling. I'm sure you find something.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cool. Day in the life of a PM. We have about 5 minutes. I'll go through this quickly. This is what a usual Monday looks like for me. Mondays are usually the busiest day. I get in about 8:30, but I spend about an hour planning the top priorities of the week and picking the top 3 for the day. 9:30 to 10, I spend some time analyzing the metrics and progress for key initiatives, see what things have changed over the weekend. In the morning, this is when I do my best thinking. I try to not keep any meetings in this slot. This is where I spend about thinking about product and what's next thinking. When I say product and what's next, it's about doing more higher level strategic thinking. For example, where is the business messaging landscape going? What is Google building next for business messaging? How can Facebook do a better job? Or how can Yelp improve, get a bigger market share of the home and local services industry? 12 to 12:45 is usually lunch. Sometimes it's meetings or learning sessions. The afternoon between 1 to 4 is filled with meetings with the team, with the leadership, with other cross-functional partners. I spend about 4 to 5 responding to messages, follow-ups. 5 to 6:30 is mostly for sharing, figuring out to-dos for the next day, sharing relevant information with the team, maybe finishing up some documents, and wrapping up the day. These are also some additional great resources to learn about the PM role. I think these are some of Ken Norton, Ravi Mehta, Lenny Ratchetsky are some of the most prolific writers on the PM role online. And a lot of companies like Intercom, Gusto, and GitLab have published their own PM career tracks. I can share this deck with you all so that you have this link to access these posts. I guess that's all I have. With that, I'll have to open up for Q&A if there are any more questions. No more questions?
Hi, Rohan. So I had a question.
Yeah.
So basically, okay, for the software engineer, we still agreed for the software tech companies, it's still easier to get into PM roles. So there are a lot of companies or say mid-sized startups who are coming up. So for people not in the software, what do you suggest if they want to go into the PM field?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So I'm just saying for the people not experienced in the software engineering,
Okay.
is there any possibility? And if yes, what do you suggest for them to be in the PM role?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, PMs come from very, very different walks of life. All of them don't have technical backgrounds. A lot of them don't even have technical degrees. Now it depends on what company you're going for. For example, Google for PMs have a technical round. So you will be able to ask, you should be able to talk through system design and all those things. At Facebook, there is no requirement for having a technical background. You don't need a CS major. There are no technical interviews. They only focus on like core PM skills. I think Yelp. Oh, it's been a while. I think Yelp was similar, but Yelp had Yelp has a dedicated, or at least had a dedicated analytics round at that point, where they would make you write like SQL statements and stuff. So, can you become a PM without a technical degree? Yes. Can you become a PM without technical experience? Yes. Depends on which company you're interviewing at. However, I do think to get up level and get better in your job, you need to have at least a basic understanding of tech. It doesn't need to be the granularity of like data structures, but being able to understand like what are the different components in a system like Twitter. What are the different how does these APIs work? How much, having a rough sense of like how much time does it take to build something? How hard is something? I think those elements are really important.
Thank you for clearing.
Oh, Yashwin has a question. What's the best and the worst thing according to you about the PM role? I think the best thing for me is that I get to be involved with the entire life cycle of the product. That's like something that's super exciting for me. The fact that I can work with analysts, finance people, privacy people, lawyers, designers, data scientists. No 2 days are the same. That's like, I think people used to say that. I would be like, no, that's just like that you're just saying that. No, but I think that's really, really very true. You're just focusing on like such different aspects of the product every single day that it's super fun and super exciting. It never gets old. And also the PM role means like very different things at different companies. So you move to a different company, it's like a completely new thing. You just never get bored. There's always something exciting. And what's the worst thing? I think worst thing is letting go of your ideas and like solutions. Because your job is to like essentially help people make decisions and also like sometimes contribute to like a lot of those decisions and come up with ideas. And you come up with ideas, build narratives around it, talk to 1,000 people, try to get buy-in from leadership team, and sometimes the data just doesn't support your hypothesis. Sometimes you run an experiment, you realize, this is not working, and you had high hopes, you were super excited about it. You still want to push the team and try to maybe just like do it again, one more iteration, maybe, but it's not the best thing to do because it's going to lead to wastage of time because we don't have any evidence. I think getting close to an idea, then having to like coming up with an idea, trying to get buy-in for it, and then getting excited about it, and then dropping it is something that's demoralizing. And I think PMs often experience that moment because most things that you would work on don't go as well because you're trying to solve hard problems. You're trying to solve like come up with when you're trying to solve hard problems. Most, especially in growth, because growth's a game of inches. You need to try a lot of different things before something works, and then you double down. Most things don't work, and that gets demoralizing. So best thing, being able to work on different aspects of the product. Worst thing, letting go of your ideas. Gargi has a question. Do you see former consultants working as PMs, or they work in just strategy-focused roles? I mean, whatever they want to do, whatever you're a good fit for, it depends. You probably heard me say like it depends a million times. There's like a running joke that this is like one of the most like common things that PMs say all the time. It depends. It depends on the context. And it does depend on the context. I guess I don't know if it necessarily makes you better or worse at a PM job, but it doesn't like stop you from becoming a PM or being focused on like strategy focused roles. I'm not sure what exactly do you mean by a strategy focused role. Do you have like an example in mind?
Yeah, so most of the consultants I've seen, they switch from consulting roles to join the tech firms in growth or strategy related roles, and mostly not working in technical or technology focused roles. So my question was focused more into that. Do they work in growth and strategy, or they come onto the tech side later on, even if they do not have a technical professional working experience?
Um, Hmm. Now, I guess that kind of depends on the context as we just talked about, whether you're working at a company which needs you to have a technical background, like maybe Google, maybe that wouldn't fly at Google. But they might, let's say you've consulted, I don't know, like AWS or like the Google Cloud might be super excited to still hire you, even though you don't have that because you have the, experience of working with in the exact same problem space. I also think the more senior you get, the more your strategy, how you set strategy and how you like execute for like help larger teams like execute on big problem spaces becomes more important and relevant as compared to your core technical skills. It never. I think that it's always very important to have a strong grasp and an understanding of the product technically of the product that you're building. Um, but I think your focus on building strategy becomes more building the strategy for like big problem spaces becomes more and more important as you become more senior.
So, what would your recommendation be? Like, if someone wants to switch, should they switch when they get more experience and switch to, roles which are more broadly focused, or start from a switch at a junior level so that they get the required expertise and then they move up the ladder?
I mean, whatever you whatever you want to do. Like I remember having this conversation with a VP at Yahoo, and he strongly recommended that I should start as a software engineer first, and then over time, like get a grasp of how like things and products and everything functions, and that get into a PM role. And even after the conversation, he told me you don't seem like you were too excited about that option or that idea, and I feel like you still want to go down the PM route. And I did still want to go down the PM route. I was always excited about the idea of building stuff, like designing and building products, like engineering and design aspects of things. But I didn't want that to be my full-time job. That was never something that like solving super hard technical problems never excited me the most. What excites me the most is building like a product strategy and getting like big teams to achieve like success, being able to be successful and build processes around that and helping teams unblock. I love being able to influence the strategy and product through other people. So I wanted to start as a PM. Now it depends on like, what do you want to do first? Are you excited about engineering? Do you want to go down that route to see first, learn if that's something you're excited about, and then maybe like pivot? Or are you someone who wants to just dive into the PM role right away?
Yeah, I think I want to be someone who dives right away because I don't have any software engineering professional experience. So, like that's what my question was. I'm working in consulting right now, and that is why I wanted to ask. Like, what do you see the general trend? People switching from consulting to into tech companies.
Switching from consulting into tech. So sorry, your voice broke from. You said you're someone who doesn't have enough. You said software engineering experience, and you want
Yeah,
to dive
I
directly
have
into PM.
zero professional software work experience. I did
Okay.
I did not join a software engineering role right after triple IT. I joined
Okay.
a consulting role, and that's where I'm working. So my question was, what do you see consultants mostly do? Do they join tech companies as product managers, or they do work similar to what they do in consulting firms? In consulting firms, they mostly do strategy related work. So is that the same thing that they do in tech companies?
It's it's on the. It depends on what problem you're working on. Oh my god, I need to find another phrase for it depends. I feel like I'm just saying it so many times. I'm gonna sound crazy, but it does depend on like what product you're working on. Some products at the moment require you to focus more on like strategy. But like for example, mm, at Facebook, we do a biannual planning process. Where it's we plan like we everyone has a 2-3 year strategy, but you still like you have a long range plan, but you also do like 6-month plans to get the team to execute faster. So I spend majority of my time, the time that I invest in building strategies is towards the end of a half. Like I just in June, for example, I spend almost every day just thinking about like the strategy, talking to my leadership, talking to my partner team's leadership, and presenting it and getting buy-in. So that's the month where I spend the most amount of time of my time in strategy. Then July comes. July is when the second half has just started. This next 30 days, I will just be focused on making sure we can get products off the ground. We can start executing now, helping the engineers build relationships with other teams engineers, helping set up processes, trackers, everything in place. And after July is when I again start getting back into more like deep product thinking. So it's never that you absolutely stop doing something, but the thing that you do the most sort of changes from month to month. So it's not one or the other. It kind of depends on where you are in this planning process or product process or whatever you may call it.
Okay, so there are like a bunch of functions that you need to take care of. It's not just one thing that you have, you have to plan for, have to work on. It's like a mix of a lot of things you're doing at the same time.
Yes, it's definitely a mix of a lot of things, and I think that's also what excites me the most. Is uh, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Hi, Rhythm. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I was just waiting. So, can you like share some tools that you use in your job daily?
What do you mean by tools? Can you give
Tools
me an
as in,
example?
yeah. So, I mean, so in your day-to-day life, so what are the tools and technologies that you use?
Yeah, a lot. Actually, a lot of them. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Um, A lot of them. I think at Yelp we were more dependent on external like products like Tableaus and like all of that jazz. Facebook has like some of the most impressive internal like tech infrastructure I've seen. Like a lot of the tools Facebook has built internally are probably better alternatives than I've seen people use outside. Build a business around. Um, I think the some tools that I use on a day-to-day basis. One is Tableau, like dashboards.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
Facebook has an alternative, but some dashboards are on Tableau, some are like internal tools. So to look at numbers, look at metrics, and what else? Obviously, like Google Docs, Google Drive, sort of that standard
Yeah, I
like
mean, yeah,
that.
those are like pretty standard. Yeah.
Yeah, the standard like collaboration softwares. From a tech perspective, let me think. There's analytics tools. I mean, I use we've got an internal query engine that we've
Mm-hmm.
built to for that's more like privacy compliant and have all those permissions in place and stuff. So we use that a bunch to run like basic queries and pull some quick numbers around there. Um, I think the two most that I probably use are like the analytics dashboards and there's a tool called Scuba for like building like running quick queries or also like the experimentation platform. Geez, how did I
Mm-hmm.
forget that? Our internal experimentation platform is called Deltoid. So I use that like I probably end up on Deltoid at least once every day.
All right. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Tableau mostly covers the visualizations and the metrics part, right? So, yeah.
So, yeah, but like, yes, Tableau does cover the metrics and visualization part, but I think it's harder to like run queries like custom queries on Tableau. It's when I feel like maybe I just don't know Tableau well enough. That's why I prefer using the internal tool. And I also sometimes use like Splunk and like SignalFX. Splunk is mostly for like to see when it's like mostly system health issues to check out like to visualize like system logs to see where things might be breaking. And signal effects, I'm not sure if you know about what that is, but it's an observability tool, which
Mm-hmm.
is essentially to get the real-time health of your technical infrastructure. So it's rare that I use Splunk and Signal FX, but I want to say at least once in 2 weeks when there's an issue or like performance downtime or something to flag an issue or create a ticket for someone
Mm-hmm.
else. Also ticketing. Man, my engine is not going to be happy if I can't remember that as my top five too. Uh, yeah, we've got an internal Jira alternative called Tasks, so we use that. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, I was yeah assuming there might be an alternative for Jira.
yeah, yeah. Facebook's built like everything inside. The internal infrastructure, the IT infrastructure is just insane. It's mind blowing. Yeah. And also work. I don't know. Do you guys know about Workplace? Have you heard about the tool Workplace?
No, not workplace.
It's like Facebook for work. We use
You
that
mean
every day.
you mean like an internal Facebook, like only for the employees?
No, everyone can use it. It's like an alternative to Slack. I just shared the link in comments.
Okay.
Yeah, we used it sometime. Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, it looks just like
Uh,
Slack. Yeah.
It's very different actually. Slack is more like so they're not just channels, they're like news feeds and groups and everything in it. It's slightly different. But yeah. Cool. I guess we're over time. I also need to head off to another meeting. Well, it was great talking to you all. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can send me an email. I'm slow to respond, but I try to respond as fast as I can. I dropped in my email address in the comments, in the messages section, sorry. Yeah, feel free to reach out. Hopefully this was helpful.
Thanks a ton, bro.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you so much, Rohan, for giving your time. And if I would request all participants if they can turn on their camera and we can have a snip of all.
Is it only me or what?
So I was thinking like everyone can turn on their cameras.
I,
Okay then.
I guess.
And
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could drop off now, I guess.
yeah. So again, thank you so much, Rohan, like for giving your time for this talk, interesting talk. Hope to see
Yeah.
you and meet you in person.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
thank you, Rohan.
Thank
It
you.
was very
Yeah.
informative.
Cool. Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.